All right, folks. Third time is a charm, I think. Please let me know if you can hear me here in the chat. We've had some technical issues here the first couple times. Again, just let me know that the audio sounds all right. First time the audio was off, so hopefully all of the technical issues are worked out here. But folks, today I did want to cover the breaking news out of Russia. There is apparently an armed rebellion taking place in Russia by the Wagner group. And we're going to cover that today. We're going to break down some possible scenarios and possibilities for what is actually taking place here. Also cover the breaking news and go over what Vladimir Putin said about all of this. But hopefully now it looks like the audio is all taken care of. Also, folks, during the broadcast today, if you would like to share your own opinion on what you think is happening here, or any insight or theories that you may have, please do submit a super chat, and I will read those during the stream. But I just wanted to start off by going over the news as reported by BBC, just in case anyone has not been following this breaking story over the last 24 hours. Again, this is effectively an armed rebellion taking place inside of Russia. So this article by BBC goes over what exactly is taking place here. Is this a coup? What is Prigozhin doing in Russia? This is a defining moment in Russia's 16-month full-scale war in Ukraine and potentially a challenge to Vladimir Putin's grip on power. The Russian leader has accused Wagner mercenary boss Yevgeny Prigozhin of treason, embarking on an armed rebellion and a stab in the back of our country. One of Russia's most important figures, Prigozhin says his aim is not a military coup, but a march for justice. What is happening with the Wagner coup? The Wagner group. For months, Prigozhin has played a vital role in Russia's military campaign in Russia, recruiting thousands of his Wagner mercenary group, especially from Russian jails. He has long been in an open feud with the military chiefs running the war, but that has now turned into a revolt as they try to bring his forces under their command structure. Wagner forces have crossed from occupied eastern Ukraine into the big southern Russian city of Rostov-on-Don and claim to have taken control of the city and its military facilities. President Putin says the situation is difficult, but has promised to do everything to defend Russia. Is this a coup? All claims of a military coup are absurd, claims Prigozhin. But what began as a no-holds-barred row over the military's failure to supply his mercenaries with sufficient kit and ammunition has now spilled over into a direct challenge to the two men in charge of prosecuting the war, Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu and Armed Forces Chief Valery Gerasimov. So far, this is not a coup, as there has been no stated bid to seize power from the government. Prigozhin's private military company does not represent the military either, although he does claim to have widespread support in the armed forces. But it is an attempt to topple Russia's top brass and therefore a challenge to the president's authority. And even though it was Russia's leader who allowed Prigozhin to develop his rival force, he clearly has no control of him anymore. The Kremlin is taking this extremely seriously. The whole Moscow region has been put on an alert under a strict, quote, counter-terrorist operation regime, and major events have been canceled. Similar measures are in place in the Voronezh region near Ukraine's northeastern border. There are 25,000 of us, Prigozhin claimed. Everyone who wants, join us. That is not enough to threaten the president, but it is a challenge to the military leadership. Moving his forces across the border to Rostov, he claimed control of the military headquarters from where the war was being run, and video showed his men in the center of the city apparently encountering no resistance. He denies betraying Russia, and in an outspoken criticism of the president says he is deeply wrong. What does Prigozhin want? His idea of a march for justice is vague, but his row with the military leadership has clearly escalated so fast he wants to force them out. A video has emerged of Prigozhin telling a deputy defense minister and a general in Rostov on Friday that until the two main military figures come and talk to him, his mercenaries will block off the city and head for Moscow. There are reports of a military helicopter being shot down and of a Wagner convoy heading north up the M4 motorway in Voronezh region north of Rostov. Prigozhin's quarrel is not with Russian soldiers in Ukraine, but the clowns leading them, he argues. Several generals have appealed to him to calm down, but that seems to be too late. What is the relationship between Putin and Prigozhin? Prigozhin has long been a close ally of President Putin and has flourished under him, first as a wealthy businessman and then as a mercenary chief. His Wagner fighters have died in big numbers in the bitter campaign to seize Bakhmut in eastern Ukraine, which lasted months and was never fully achieved. That's not quite accurate. Prigozhin blamed the military top brass for shell shortages, with graphic videos and expletive-ridden social media rants exposing the failings and fractures of Russia's military in Ukraine. Until this point, he never directly targeted his anger at the president, but his sarcastic reference to "happy grandfather" were widely seen as indirect criticism. Last month, he asked how Russia could win if it turned out that this grandfather is a complete arsehole. Earlier this month, President Putin supported a move by Sergei Shoigu to have all mercenary groups in Ukraine sign defense ministry contracts by July 1st. Prigozhin has refused, seeing it as a challenge to his influence. In a lengthy tirade on June 23rd, he told Russians that the whole justification for the war was a lie and merely an excuse for a small group of scumbags to promote themselves and deceive the public and the president. Events have moved very quickly since then. Military sites in Rostov seized. Prigozhin accused the military of staging a deadly shelling on his men in Ukraine, but the military denied it and he failed to produce the kind of evidence he often does. Late on Friday, he announced his March for Justice was underway. His force of 25,000 would be just a tactical reserve, and the whole of the army and the whole country would be their strategic reserve. General Sergei Surovikin, deputy commander of the forces in Ukraine, appealed to him to step back and submit to President Putin's authority. But by morning, Prigozhin's men had reached Rostov. "We are inside military headquarters," he later said. They had taken the city without a shot. So here's a map here showing the distance. So you can see Rostov-on-Don is kind of on the southeastern border of Ukraine here, and Moscow is well above the same latitude as Kiev. Wagner fighters are also said to have seized military facilities in Voronezh, further north towards Moscow, and videos have shown a convoy of vehicles heading north on the M4 towards Moscow. A serious moment for Putin and Russia. This is not a direct challenge to Russia's war in Ukraine, and Prigozhin has maintained he is not disputing the president's leadership, but it is sufficiently serious for the Russian leader to give a determined and uncompromising 5-minute televised address. Prigozhin has threatened to head towards Moscow if his military demands are not met. What happens if he follows through with that? At the very least, Vladimir Putin looks like a leader who has lost control of a fast-moving situation. Prigozhin has substantial public support in Russia, and even if his challenge does fall apart, this has become a moment of crisis for a military that has relied on mercenaries in Ukraine. It is also a defining moment for the Putin leadership and a wake-up call for Russians. It is too soon to see how this will all end. Yes, well. So let's listen to Vladimir Putin's address. This is from earlier this morning.
Обращаюсь к гражданам России, к личному составу вооруженных сил.
I'm addressing the citizens of Russia, to the personnel of the armed forces, law enforcement agencies and special services, to the soldiers and commanders, who are now fighting on their combat positions, repelling enemy attacks, and doing so heroically. I know I spoke with the commanders again tonight. I am also addressing those who have been led through deception or threats into this criminal misadventure and who have been forced onto the path of the gravest of crimes, an armed mutiny.
Тяжкого преступления вооруженного мятежа. Россия сегодня ведет тяжелейшую борьбу за свое будущее.
Today, Russia is fighting an extremely tough battle for its future and is repelling the aggression of the neo-Nazis and their masters. In fact, the entire military, economic and information machine of the West is directed against us. We are fighting for the life and security of our people, for our sovereignty and independence, for the right to be and remain Russia, a state with a 1,000-year history.
Государством с тысячелетней историей. Это битва, когда решается судьба нашего народа.
This is a battle where the fate of our people is being decided, that requires the unity of all forces, unity, consolidation and responsibility. When everything that weakens us, any kind of discord, which our external enemies can use and are using to undermine us from the inside, must be put aside. And so actions that split our unity are, in essence, an apostasy from our people, from our comrades in arms who are fighting on the front line right now. It is a stab in the back of our country and our people.
Это удар в спину нашей стране и нашему народу.
This is exactly the kind of blow that struck Russia in 1917, when the country fought World War I. But the victory was stolen from her. Intrigues, squabbles, and politicking behind the backs of the army and the people resulted in the greatest upheaval, the destruction of the army and the collapse of the state, and the loss of vast territories. In the end, it resulted in the tragedy of a civil war. Russians killed Russians, brothers, their brothers. And mercenary gains were made by all kinds of political adventurers and foreign forces who divided the country and tore it into pieces.
Политические авантюристы, да зарубежные силы, которые делили страну, рвали ее на части.
We will not let this happen again. We will protect both our people and our statehood from any threats, including internal betrayal. And what are we facing is precisely betrayal. Excessive ambitions and vested interests have led to treason, betrayal of the country, its people and the cause for which the soldiers and commanders of the Wagner group had fought and died, side by side with other units. Those heroes who liberated Solidar and Bakhmut, towns and villages of the Donbass region, fought and gave their lives for Novorossiya, for the unity of the Russian world. Their name and glory have also been betrayed by those who are trying to organize a rebellion, pushing the country towards anarchy and fratricide to defeat ultimately and capitulation.
Жизни за Новороссию, за единство русского мира. Их имя и славу тоже предали те, кто пытается организовать мятеж.
I repeat, any internal turmoil is a mortal threat to our statehood, to us as a nation. This is a blow to Russia, to our people. The actions we will take to protect our homeland from such a threat will be harsh. All those who consciously chose the path of betrayal, who prepared an armed mutiny, who chose the path of blackmail and terrorism, will suffer an inevitable punishment, will answer both before the law and our people.
Защите Отечества от такой угрозы будут жесткие. Все, кто сознательно встал на путь
The
предательства.
armed forces and other government agencies have received the necessary orders, and additional anti-terrorist measures are now being introduced in Moscow, the Moscow region, and a number of other regions. Decisive action will also be taken to stabilize the situation in Rostov-on-Don. It remains difficult. The work of the civilian and military administration bodies is effectively blocked.
Дополнительные меры антитеррористического характера вводятся сейчас в Москве, в Московской области.
As President of Russia and Commander-in-Chief, as a citizen of Russia, I will do everything to defend the country, to protect the constitutional order, the lives, security and freedom of its citizens. Those who organized and prepared the military uprising, who took up their arms against their commanders-in-chief, those who organized and prepared the military uprising, who took up arms against their comrades in arms, betrayed Russia and will answer for it. I call on those who are being dragged into this crime not to make the fatal and tragic, inimitable mistake, to make only right choice, to stop participating in criminal actions. I believe that we will save and defend what is dear and sacred to us, and together with our motherland we will overcome any other trials and we will become even stronger.
В это преступление.
So as you can see, this is being portrayed very seriously. It's being portrayed in a historical context. him effectively hearkening back to the Russian Revolution and talking about how this is a threat to the Russian nation and the Russian people. So clearly, Vladimir Putin is taking this uprising, or this march for justice, as it's being called, very seriously. So again, they are tracking the movement of the Wagner group towards Moscow right now. This is somewhat outdated, but they were spotted, I guess, in the Lebetsk Oblast, which is about roughly halfway between Rostov-on-Don and Moscow, maybe a little bit closer towards Moscow. I was listening to a Twitter Spaces right before I went live, and they were talking about some mercenaries being sighted closer to Moscow. So clearly there is a movement towards the capital, which again just shows what a serious situation this is. Of course, on the left here, I do have a live view of Moscow. So as you can see, things look pretty normal at the moment. So I have been following War Monitor on Twitter. War Monitors, they're a pretty good resource for the latest updates on this. And there have been, just over the last several hours, many pictures of roads being blocked, of just different checkpoints being set up. There's some helicopters in flight. There was also earlier some imagery from Rostov of military helicopters shooting flares. There also was a report, as the BBC article mentioned, of a helicopter being downed. So, as you can see, this does appear to be very serious. One point that I heard made on RT earlier this morning that I thought was, a pretty good one is, we have seen the Ukrainian counteroffensive fail in large part because of a lack of air support, right? So we've seen this artillery, we've seen these tanks and whatnot being blown up on the battlefield because there is no air support by the Ukrainian Air Force. And it's a little odd that following that, we're now seeing these Wagner mercenaries who themselves don't have seemingly any air support marching towards Moscow. You would think that the Russian Air Force would make pretty short work of this. So again, this is a developing situation. We're getting constant updates about this regularly. So again, this is something that could develop very quickly. We've again, 49 seconds ago, breaking supposed wreckage of the downed Ka-52 on the Russian aerospace forces near the village of Talavaya, Voronezh region. So again, we're getting a lot of this in, and some of this, it might be hard to confirm what actually is happening. And clearly there is a lot of allegations out there too that what we may be seeing may not be what it looks like. So those are some different scenarios that are worth considering. There's this 5T-58E transport vehicles with anti-aircraft missiles and a 22 T-6E2 loading vehicles from the S-400 air defense system proceeding through Bataysk towards Rostov. So again, I've been following this account. It seems to have pretty constant updates. This is from an hour ago. Lukashenko held 2 meetings against the backdrop of events in Russia with the leadership of the power bloc and military. The press secretary of the Belarusian president told RIA Novosti. And then this is another tweet. We will not let events go according to the scenario. Here, let me expand this here. We will not let events go according to this scenario so that the bandits get nuclear weapons, no matter how crazy criminals would like, Medvedev said. Speculation about Prigozhin's past grievances, failure to fulfill certain obligations of the Ministry of Defense, strikes on the rear, and corruption of officials are nonsense, he said. So, again, this is something I kind of wanted to discuss, was some of the different scenarios of what could possibly be happening here. And Obviously, some of these are sort of conspiracy theories, but this is a very unique, dramatic, and this is a historical moment, truly, that we're seeing this march happen. And again, the timing is very odd too, because we've seen a failure of the Ukrainian counteroffensive, and there's been a lot of talk recently of Russia carrying out attacks or false flag attacks. And it's very strange timing for this to happen. Obviously, Prigozhin has been critical of the Russian military leadership, I believe, since the start of this operation, or at least for the last several months. So let's just discuss a few different scenarios here. Again, these are just possibilities. Some may be more likely than others. Some may seem a lot crazier than others. But again, I think it's important to consider all the possibilities. And again, folks, if you have any of your own theories or just things that don't sit right with you about this, please do mention them in the super chat, and I'll read those. But basically, as I see it, there's four key scenarios that could be happening here. The first is just everything is as it appears, right? This actually is Prigozhin, who is upset with Russia's military leadership. He is wanting to remove the top brass of Russia's military. He doesn't want the Wagner group disbanded. So he is legitimately doing everything that the media is reporting that is happening. Everything's transparent. Vladimir Putin was forced into a tough situation where he had to basically pick sides. And unsurprisingly, he sided with his own military as opposed to siding with these mercenaries. So, this is a difficult situation for Russia for a few reasons. Again, the Wagner group was a major part of the war in Ukraine. They did eventually defeat the Ukrainian military in Bakhmut, and they're seen by a large segment of the Russian population as heroes. So, again, you have these people, these mercenaries who are thought of heroically by a large segment of Russia's population, marching against the military, the Russian military, the top brass of Russia's military, and Vladimir Putin siding with that top brass. So that could be the case. Again, that's what all reports are currently, that basically is the situation that is happening. And it is a very dangerous situation for, obvious reasons. Again, Russia is a major nuclear superpower. It actually has the largest nuclear stockpile on Earth. So the fact that we've had all of this talk about nuclear weapons over the past 16 months, it really brings to mind the fact that if Wagner was able to get a hold of nuclear weapons, that obviously would create all kinds of issues, right? They could use it in Ukraine. They could, potentially use it against the military leadership. So, we could potentially see some very serious things happen there. But also, there's other factors involved here. If we think about this, there's also an opportunistic. NATO could be opportunistic here. Kiev could be opportunistic, and try to use this as a way to actually make the counteroffensive work, right? If you have Russia in effectively a civil war, if you have people choosing sides, whether they're siding with Prigozhin or siding with Russia's military leadership, then obviously that creates an avenue for Ukraine to actually launch counteroffensive attacks, regain some land, possibly even launch an attack on Crimea. So again, this is a very dangerous situation. And also, you have to think of the mindset of Vladimir Putin right now, where he probably has that in the back of his mind, that this would be a great opportunity for NATO to strike. So there is all kinds of danger there with miscalculations, with they could be on high alert. And, I would hope that NATO is not looking at this opportunistically and not going to do something crazy to try to, win the war in Ukraine or further destabilize Russia somehow, just because there is a high potential that this could be seen as a provocation or an attack by NATO on Russia. So hopefully, that doesn't happen, but that is a real danger here. So again, that's just the first scenario, and that's the one that the media is reporting, and that's the one that Russia seems to be portraying as well. But there are some other scenarios. Again, you could call them conspiracy theories, and I think there are things that we should consider. Again, just because this is such a weird occurrence and such, this is a historical moment. So the second could be Prigozhin. Keep in mind, he is a mercenary, and the Wagner group are mercenaries. They were paid off by the CIA or by NATO, and that they effectively took a payoff or some other kind of reward or promise to do what they're currently doing. Because again, this is an odd moment for this to be happening insofar as we have seen a complete abject failure of the Ukrainian counteroffensive so far. We've seen NATO tanks being blown up on the battlefield, and just this long promised counteroffensive not come into fruition, or just be a very large disappointment. So it's a very odd time for there to be this armed rebellion against Russia's military leadership. So it could be a possibility that for whatever reason, whether it's a payoff or a promise or whatever, that Prigozhin is effectively working hand in hand with NATO. So that is something to consider. And if that was the case, that might even be a more dangerous situation. Or even if Russia, even if Putin and Russia's military leadership thought that might be the case, that's very dangerous for the reasons you see in this tweet here. If they think this is actually an attack by NATO inside of Russia, that is a threat to the Russian state. That's exactly what Vladimir Putin has said repeatedly he would consider, the appropriate circumstances under which to use nuclear weapons if there was an existential attack on the Russian state. So again, if either if that is legitimately the case, or if it was just perceived to be the case, that again could create an opportunity for nuclear war. So that would be a second scenario, and again, potentially an even worse scenario than what's being reported currently. And then the third scenario is that this could be a psyop by Russia. This could be just a big show, right? Again, Putin and Prigozhin are very close. They could be using this as cover to do something, right? They could be preparing some kind of attack. I think some folks on the on the NATO side of things have sort of considered that this might be cover for them to do their own nuclear strike inside of Ukraine. Maybe have Wagner obtain nuclear weapons, nominally have them be separate from the Russian government or fighting the Russian government, obtain nuclear weapons, use them in Ukraine, for example. And, Russia would not technically be responsible for that. So that is another possibility. Again, it's a conspiracy theory, but it could be that Prigozhin actually is still working with Putin, that this is just a show, and that this is giving cover for something like a nuclear strike, something very large to take place here. And the final conspiracy theory, and I'll admit this is the most outlandish, but again, it is worth considering because this is such a weird situation that we're in. It could be the case that, everything that we've seen with this war so far has been a show. That, it's not been really a legitimate war. I mean, real people have been fighting and dying, but effectively, is it possible that Putin, Prigozhin, Zelensky, Biden, maybe they're really all on the same team? Maybe they're really on the World Economic Forum team. And maybe this is all just a show or cover for something else. And who knows what that might be. So those are the different major scenarios that could be taking place. None of them are really that good, that attractive. All of them very dangerous. All of them carry with it the potential for nuclear war. So again, this is a pretty historic moment and a very dangerous moment as well. And hopefully, we see a peaceful resolution to this, a peaceful resolution to the war in Ukraine, and not things spiraling out of control. But again, this is a very dangerous moment when you apparently, whether in reality or in show, have Russian mercenaries marching towards Moscow to to, I guess, remove Russia's military leadership. So again, folks, if you have any of your own thoughts, please submit a super chat and I'll read that. I do have one super chat here. It says, thanks for streaming. I wonder what happened to that accounting error. Some people might think there's a connection. Not me, though. I'm sure that money will show up safe and sound. So again, that is something that folks have been mentioning as well, is that there was this recently announced accounting error where, hey, magically there's billions more for the war in Ukraine, just because the government apparently forgot to carry a few zeros. I don't know. And so magically some money showed up for the war in Ukraine. And again, it is possible that Prigozhin was paid off, right? I mean, he is a mercenary. His 25,000 men are mercenaries. All they really care about at the end of the day is money. So that could be it. You know, another possibility, another conspiracy theory is that Prigozhin, you know, could have had connections to the CIA or, you know, some other intelligence network, Western or otherwise, for, you know, for decades. It's entirely possible. So we, again, we really don't know what's going on here. This is just a rapidly developing story, and it's rapidly developing, and it's also slow moving because the stakes are so high. So this has been happening since yesterday. And again, we're seeing these mercenaries now march towards Moscow. But again, the stakes are so high that, you know, we just kind of want to see this resolved, honestly. So I also did want to discuss something else that happened. I believe this was yesterday. And this was a proposal by Richard Blumenthal, who's my senator here in Connecticut, and Lindsey Graham. And, you know, it's actually funny, too, because as many of you recall, the U.S. directly participated in the coup against Ukraine's democratically elected government back in 2013, 2014. And my other senator, Chris Murphy, Democratic senator, was there up on stage with John McCain, well-known neocon. So here you have my other senator, Richard Blumenthal, Democrat, on stage with Republican neocon Lindsey Graham. And let's listen to their proposal.
We're introducing a resolution today, Senate resolution that says that if Russia or Belarus, or a proxy of Russia, explodes a nuclear device inside of Ukraine to stop the counteroffensive or to try to break the will of the Ukrainian people, such an attack should be considered an attack on NATO itself. We're of the belief that a nuclear weapon unleashed in Ukraine would irradiate large portions of Europe where we have NATO allies. And why are we doing this? President Biden says threat of Putin using tactical nuclear weapons is real. That's like the 20th story down. So with a sense of urgency, we're urging our colleagues here to get serious about what could happen in Ukraine. Moving the tactical nuclear weapons out of Russia to Belarus was unnerving and I think very provocative. The counteroffensive is moving slowly but steadily. They're looking for...
It's failing steadily, is what he means to say.
...for a break. They will commit the forces that have been trained by the West, 6 or 8 regiments, thousands of well-trained, well-equipped forces will be put into the battle when they can exploit an opportunity. So the Ukrainians are patient. Russia has fortified their defensive positions. They've mined the whole country. They've been committing war crimes on steroids. Very abusive war.
So the point of this is they're introducing this legislation to effectively consider any use of nuclear weapons by Russia against Ukraine to be an attack by Russia on NATO, which would therefore trigger Article 5, which would be World War III. So again, it's important to consider here, Ukraine is not a member of NATO. It has never been a member of NATO. It's been the goal of the United States since the Bush administration, since 2008, or really before that, to be a member of NATO. But Ukraine is not a member of NATO. And again, what's most disconcerting here is, this happened, just as Prigozhin's rebellion started. But again, if you had theoretically Wagner using nuclear weapons, or if you had a false flag attack happening by Kiev, which we've seen repeatedly, we've seen over and over and over again, Kiev launch false flag attacks, including bombing Poland and denying responsibility. I still think, it's been, 7 months? I don't think Ukraine has ever accepted responsibility for bombing Poland. They still claim it was Russia. You had the Nord Stream pipeline, you had the dam that recently was blown up. There's case after case after case of Ukraine, of the Kiev regime, engaging in these false flag attacks. And also, they've been shelling this nuclear power plant inside of Ukraine, inside of Russian-controlled territory. So, they could launch a false flag attack and have it appear as though Russia is setting off a nuclear weapon. And Lindsey Graham and Richard Blumenthal want us to consider that to be an attack by Russia on NATO. So again, that just goes to show you how unhinged things are with our leaders, and just how badly they seem to want World War III to happen. Like, it just seems to me as though they don't really understand what the ramifications of World War III and a nuclear war would be. None of us would survive. Basically, the entire planet, with the exception of, I guess, the people who are rich enough to have the bunkers and the islands and whatnot, the vast majority of us would not live through World War III. So, again, that's what makes their resolution so dangerous, and that's what makes the situation currently unfolding inside Russia so dangerous. So I did have another super chat here I wanted to read. Note to self, never ever give a celebrity chef heavy artillery. Yeah, it is, it's been a weird sort of story with Prigozhin overall, with him, he was this convict, and he started selling hot dogs, and then became a chef, and I guess that's when he met Putin, and eventually, he had denied for a while that he was actually the head of Wagner, but then he went to Ukraine and, I guess, unveiled himself as the head of Wagner, and now he's marching, apparently against Russia's military leadership. So again, that could be the possibility that he's an egomaniac, he's an ex-criminal, he's just a psychotic person, or the effects of the war really got to him. I heard saw somebody saying on Twitter that they reminded him of Marlon Brando's character in Apocalypse Now, where just the war drove him crazy. Perhaps he legitimately did see his men being disregarded by Russia's military and being taken for granted. And, maybe that really just got to him to the point where he is now marching against that leadership. Maybe he thought, because he's had such a long relationship with Putin, that Putin would be forced to side with him, or that the Russian people would side with him. But it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out, and it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out with the Russian people and with Russia's military as well. Are segments of Russia's population, are segments of the Russian military going to side with Wagner? Again, I think it's kind of curious that we haven't really been seeing the Russian Air Force active yet. Is that because they just don't want to start dropping bombs on Russian soil? Is it because is it because this is all just a show? Is it because, is it because the people in the Russian Air Force actually do have some sympathy for the Wagner group? So I guess only time will tell. Another super chat here. Nuclear war survival skills online, free PDF. Yes, well, I think there's not too many places in the United States where you're really going to be safe from nuclear war. And the thing is about nuclear war, even if you were to survive it, the nuclear winter that follows would effectively kill you eventually, right? Because we just saw this with the wildfires here. I don't know about where you folks are, but we had the wildfires up in Canada, and it was a thick cloud of smoke here in Connecticut. We're hundreds of miles away, but you could barely breathe outside just because the smoke was so thick, and you could smell it even indoors. You could smell it. So I think that gives a pretty good perspective of what it might be like if there was a nuclear war. You're going to have toxic smoke. You're going to have this cloud of smoke, not just from the nuclear explosions themselves, but from everything burning from the nuclear fires. So you're going to have these big thick clouds of smoke, and everything's going to be irradiated. And I've heard that there would be decades, effectively, if there was a full-scale nuclear exchange between Russia and the United States, then there would be literally decades where the sun would not shine like it shines currently, and that would lead to just massive famine, and effectively more people would die in the nuclear winter than would actually die in the nuclear war. So not something to look forward to, not something that we should be playing with. And again, it's just it's remarkable that we've seen the escalation of things in Ukraine for the last 16 months. I mean, even before, right? It's ridiculous that we engaged in the coup in 2014, but and armed the Nazis after that and all that. But we just have been playing with fire so much for the last 16 months and escalating. And initially, it seemed as though Biden was somewhat reluctant to do things like send F-16s or get too engaged, because he recognized that there was a threat of nuclear conflict. And for whatever reason, we've seen him, probably because he's senile and demented, and ultimately a war criminal himself, but mostly probably because he's senile. We've seen him just get led further and further into it. So again, a very dangerous situation where you have mercenaries inside Russia rebelling. You have a failed counteroffensive in Ukraine. This is just a lot of really bad dynamics all coming into fruition at the same time. So again, hopefully we don't all die. That would be good if that didn't happen. So lastly, folks, I just wanted to cover another story in case you missed it, about Hunter Biden. And, it hasn't been reported too much in the corporate media. But this is the latest from the AP. Attorney General denies whistleblower claims on interference in Hunter Biden investigation. Attorney General Merrick Garland pushed back Friday against claims from IRS whistleblowers that the Justice Department interfered with the investigation into Hunter Biden, saying more broadly that attacks on the department's independence are corrosive. Republican-led House Ways and Means Committee on Thursday released a transcript of testimony from Gary Shapley, an IRS official, who among other things claimed that Garland had denied a request from U.S. Attorney David Weiss of Delaware to be appointed special counsel. That designation would. Okay, this isn't me. I know I'm not the best reader all the time, but this is a typo. Oh Jesus! And you got the dog popping up too. Where were we? All right, that designation would have given Weiss the same status as the prosecutor leading the investigation into former President Donald Trump. Weiss never made such a request, Garland said Friday, and always had full authority to file charges wherever and however he saw fit against President Joe Biden's son. And Garland added that if Weiss, first appointed U.S. attorney by Donald Trump, agrees to testify before Congress, the Justice Department will not stand in the way. Quote, "He was given complete authority to make all decisions on his own," Garland said. "I don't know how it would be possible for anybody to block him for bringing a prosecution, given that he has that authority." More broadly, Garland forcefully rebutted criticism from Republicans that a plea agreement for the president's son on tax and gun charges made public this week reflects political influence in the American justice system. Republicans have denounced the deal as evidence of a two-tiered system of justice. Some have chosen to attack... Look how they characterize this. Some have chosen to attack the integrity of the Justice Department by claiming we do not treat like cases alike. This constitutes an attack on an institution that is essential to American democracy and essential to the safety of the American people, Garland said. Nothing could be further from the truth. In a separate statement Friday, Biden's lawyer denounced the idea that the investigation cut any corners and said it would be dangerously misleading to make conclusions based on the Shapley transcript. The transcript included a message Hunter sent to a business associate alluding to, quote, sitting with his father, seemingly suggesting that his father was aware of his business dealings. Shapley acknowledged the investigation didn't turn up evidence to prove that, instead finding that it was likely untrue. Joe Biden has said he's never spoken to his son about his foreign business. Asked Friday if the president stands by those comments, White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre replied, "What I will say is nothing has changed. Nothing has changed, and I will leave it there." Weiss's office referred request for comment about the whistleblower testimony to a June 7th letter he wrote to House Judiciary Committee Chairman Jim Jordan saying that he had ultimate authority over the investigation. The testimony from IRS agent Shapley and a second unnamed agent who worked on the case detailed what they called a pattern of slow-walking investigative steps and delaying enforcement actions in the Hunter Biden case, though it was unclear whether the conflict they described amounted to internal disagreement or a pattern of preferential treatment. Shapley said Weiss told him and others during an October 2022 meeting that he had been denied special counsel status and didn't have final authority on charging decisions. Transcripts released Thursday include an email with Shapley's notes from the meeting and a response from a supervisor saying his notes covered it all. A representative for Shapley called on Weiss and the Justice Department to explain the discrepancy. Biden's attorney, for his part, said claims the investigation wasn't thorough, are preposterous and deeply irresponsible. The Hunter Biden plea deal came days after the special counsel on the Trump case filed a historic 37-count indictment alleging mishandling of classified documents, which the former president has denied. Trump has likened the Hunter Biden agreement to a mere traffic ticket. So again, folks, this is a scandal that's unfolding here involving Hunter Biden, involving Joe Biden potentially knowing about all of his business dealings. And that's definitely the way that the text made it seem, if you saw the text there. So that is other breaking news. I guess we'll see the developments on that next week, assuming we make it to next week, assuming the nukes don't start going off between now and then. So let's just check with war monitors to see if there's been any developments here. Breaking. Source close to DPR tell Reuters convoy headed for Moscow led by senior Wagner commander Utkin plans to take up positions in built-up area. Breaking. Fighter bomber reports about the Russian Air Force losses so far today as a result of the Wagner coup. So these have been losses, apparently. The shooting near the headquarters of the Southern Military District turned out to be the execution by one of the Wagner fighters of the entrance to the local office of Rostelecom, according to numerous Russian sources. Several shots were fired near the headquarters of the Southern Military District in Rostov-on-Don. Reuters source in Wagner. Wagner force has fewer than 25,000 fighters in total. More than 5,000 are in Rostov-on-Don. And then we also are seeing these reports of Chechen troops marching. Well, I saw them earlier marching towards Rostov. Apparently this says here that they're in Moscow as well. Residents of Moscow allegedly began to receive calls from unfamiliar numbers, supposedly from PMC Wagner. Residents are called to support the Wagnerites and take to the streets. And that was what we saw earlier. So again, folks, I would recommend following War Monitor. It's at War Monitors, plural, for the latest updates. They seem to have pretty regular updates every few minutes. But this is a rapidly developing situation. This seems to be something that, again, could be potentially very, very serious and very dangerous as well. So there's also live feeds like this for Moscow. They may be good to keep tuned into. RT has a Rumble channel. As I mentioned, I was watching that earlier today. They actually they loop things on there, so you may not be getting the latest live updates, even though it's a live stream. But do keep an eye out, folks, and again, hopefully this isn't the last live stream we do. Hopefully I see you all again. And appreciate the super chats today. Again, if you'd like to support me, please go to patreon.com and patreon.com/Primo Radical. You can support me there, and you can submit questions to all my guests. I am hoping to have another interview in the near future, hopefully with somebody from the Gray Zone, just because of all the great work they've been doing lately and all the persecution that they've been suffering from the FBI colluding with Ukrainian intelligence against Aaron Mate, to Kit Klarenberg being detained at the airport in London, to Max Blumenthal confronting Rachel Maddow. There's a lot to discuss with those guys, so hopefully I have one of them on in the near future. Hopefully also somebody to talk about the developments in Russia as all of this unfolds. So please do become a patron at patreon.com/Primo Radical. You can submit questions to all of my guests. And yeah, folks, again, hope you have a nice weekend. Hope we all make it through it. And I will see you all next time.